There's more breaking news tonight in the third straight night of anti-Trump protests. We're just getting audio of Hillary Clinton speaking with campaign volunteers and staffers saying these have been very, very tough days. Let's listen to the audio.
Hello, everyone, and I really appreciate you being on this call so that I can tell you one more time how grateful I am to each and every one of you. I saw many of you on the campaign trail. You were knocking on doors in the snow in Iowa and New Hampshire, and you were part of our final sprint this fall. And in so many ways, you are the heart and soul of our campaign. And being your candidate has been one of the greatest honors of my life. I have to say that as volunteers, you didn't just talk about the values we share. You really embodied them. You made sure that our campaign was as hopeful, inclusive, and big-hearted as the America that we believe in and that we set out to build together. You left it all on the field, every single one of you, and the relationships you formed, the connections you made, I hope will prove to be of lasting significance to you, and I think will make a difference for years to come. Your work mattered, and I believe it still matters. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These have been very, very tough days.
And we're back with our panel tonight. Let's just talk a little bit about, I mean, there's been some talk today, the New York Times reporting that, Maggie, that after Secretary Clinton described half of Trump supporters as deplorables, that she realized that she had stepped in it, that was a big mistake. She'd come out later and said, well, it's not half, but still, that was clearly a dumb thing to say.
Yeah, I think that she made a very identity politics argument throughout the campaign. She talked a lot more about sort of a sum of various parts than she did about a more cohesive economic argument. She made one, I think, more coherently during the primary against Bernie Sanders, and then she lost that. She ran an identity politics-driven campaign, and then so did Donald Trump, and his won. I don't think it was one isolated thing with Clinton. I think that it was the totality of a lot of different things. I do think the commie letter hurt her, but I also think that the incident where she was sick and how she dealt with it when she had pneumonia during the 9/11 memorial was an issue. And I think that, I think deciding to give paid speeches for a year and a half before getting into the race, ultimately, I continue to go back to that. I remember at the time, I was reminded after she lost by 3 different Democratic strategists that I had said in 2013 that I didn't see how she was going to be president doing what she was doing. And I had completely forgotten that I had said all of that because the field was totally cleared for her.
Well, it's also, the decision to make those speeches that, she said at the time that she didn't know she was going to run for president, which is, I mean, that's hard to believe. And they've known that she was going to run for president for quite some time.
I got some blowback from somebody pretty close to, person close to her team today about that, who said, no, she really didn't know what she was doing. But on the other hand, I also know that as I was going through the reporting that I was doing at the time, which was a lot of preparation work, certainly by the people around her, who at minimum were preserving her options, and she knew what they were doing. You can see in the Podesta emails, and to be clear, that was a tremendous breach of privacy, that it was awful, I would imagine, for anybody, but it does make clear how much stuff was going on at the same time that they were telling reporters it wasn't.
Christine, I mean, Podesta in a call to donors was, really blamed Comey, pointing the finger at that. Is that really, I mean, obviously it probably had some sort of an impact, but in the end, isn't it all about the candidate? I mean, you can have, there's plenty of people who work their hearts out trying to bolster her as best they could, but in the end, don't voters make a choice based on the candidates?
Well, I think, look, on any campaign, win or lose, and I say this as a former candidate, the buck stops with the candidate. I mean, that is the reality, and Hillary knows that, knows that as well as anybody, having won and having lost. That said, I think there's never one thing in a campaign, right? It's the whole buildup, and it's the whole way the campaign operated. Did Director Comey's letter help 2 weeks out? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it was most impactful because I felt like at that moment in the campaign, we had some wind at our back. And I think even the Trump people would admit this over now. At that moment, we were kind of on the upswing. And that really stopped that upswing and made people answer questions that had already been litigated. So it was absolutely
Jonathan,
not
I mean,
a
you were a
help.
Bernie Sanders supporter early on.
Yeah. I mean, two things I'd say. Breaking news, don't trust the FBI.
Right.
I learned that back, when Martin Luther was spied on, and what the FBI does in politics is spy on people that are doing legal things. So breaking news both to Republicans who didn't like Comey first and to Democrats.
totally.
Don't trust the FBI. That said, look, I want to say this lightly because I know the pain is still there for many Democrats who supported Hillary Clinton. She was a terrible candidate. She was not a good candidate on the road, and she was not a good candidate to talk to the people because, and the polls showed it, she was not well liked, and the question of honesty and whether people trusted her was over the top. And we knew that going into this campaign. When you asked Maggie about the paid speeches, people out there in middle America, in the Rust Belt, in places that Donald Trump went and talked about trade issues, for example, when you say to someone, you got paid $225,000 to speak to Goldman Sachs, that just blew people's mind, and that stuck in there.
I just wanted to,
Jeffrey, I mean, there's reporting that Bill Clinton wanted the campaign to spend more time focusing on the Rust Belt states, rural areas. A lot of these things, the Comey letter, all that stuff, it probably had the big impact in it because it reaffirmed the beliefs people already had and the dislikes people already had about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back, Anderson. Last year when we were on your show, there was a Quinnipiac poll where the voters gave their impressions, and she was said to be dishonest or a liar. I mean, every single one of the stories that we've talked here fed that image as she went along. And that report about Bill Clinton, I mean, if you can say nothing else about President Clinton, he is one smart political, strategist, thank you. Why they didn't listen to him is beyond me. One of the reasons that I thought from the beginning that Donald Trump could win is because I thought exactly he could carry Pennsylvania.
But she didn't motivate part of her base. They didn't get excited about her. And Donald Trump,
there was an enthusiasm.
I sat in this very seat and said, there are people coming out. The Brexit is the same thing. People aren't picking up on it, but there are going to be a crowd of folks that come out that nobody's getting in polling.
Right.
They're going to show up. And he turned out people. People were excited to come out and vote for him. And she wasn't able to turn out part of her key core support, and that was the difference in the race.
I think there's often a zeal at the end of a campaign to make the person who lost the race into everything about their campaign and everything about that person. That's simply not accurate usually ever, and it's not in this case. And let's remember, the country was split. Neither one of them was going to win overwhelmingly in some magic campaign landslide. Did Secretary Clinton as a candidate have problems? Absolutely. But she was also, and this is kind of irrefutable, the most accomplished, prepared, ready to be president person who has ever run. And I think, although we can say all these negative things about her, it's important to note she ran, she worked hard, and took a risk to make history.
This is not helpful to the Democratic Party to think about the future, to not recognize the deep flaws in the way this campaign was conducted, and respectfully, in the candidate that was pushed on the...
I want to thank everybody in the panel. Build the Wall, of course, was a staple chant at Trump campaign rallies over this entire race. But for those threatened with being deported to the other side of it, life is now a waiting game. We'll have that story ahead next.